This is CTS, family-friendly television. We care who's watching.
Hi and welcome to Rhonda London Live. On the show today, cell phones. We all love the convenience and we all hate that annoying ring in the middle of a movie, play, restaurant meal, or even in the middle of a church service. But that annoyance may soon become a thing of the past. The federal government has launched a 90-day consultation period to ask you how you feel about cell phone silencers. The devices, more commonly known as jammers, can disable cell phones within a specified radius or even automatically switch them to vibrate instead of ring. What do you think? Should cell phones be jammed in restaurants or movie theaters? Or should jammers be restricted to hospitals, where cell phone use can actually endanger the life of some patients? As always, the phones will be open to take your calls, whether you're wireless or not. So don't go away. We're back right after this. In just a decade, cell phones have evolved from being a badge of status to a ubiquitous annoyance. Rarely a restaurant meal passes by without at least a few going off, and it seems no setting is really safe. That annoying ring can be heard in movie theaters, even church services. But all that may be a thing of the past. The federal government is exploring the idea of legalizing cell phone silencers. These jamming devices can disable a cell phone within a specified radius or switch the signal from ringing to vibrating. With his thoughts on this, we're joined by Peter Shurman. He's the CEO of Universal Teleresponse Corporation. He's also a member of the Canadian Call Management Association. Peter, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
So what are your feelings on the idea that the federal government has just launched this 90-day period, consultation period, where people will have a chance to give the government their feedback on what they think about silencers?
Well, as somebody who is involved in messaging people who have to be messaged when and wherever they are, I think it's a worry. On the other hand, I would have to tell you I have one foot firmly planted on either side of the fence, because I too go to restaurants and movie theaters where other people seem to find it necessary to gab about their golf game or what color dress to wear when I'm trying to eat my dinner or enjoy a movie. I think that's the problem. However, as a person who is involved in 7x24 messaging and is on the receiving end of some of those messages myself, I would be quite concerned about being in what we'll call a zone of silence in the event that I had to be contacted without knowing that I was in such a zone.
And is it possible to really specifically control the radius? Isn't there the danger that if you set up one of these telephone silencers, that your radius could extend beyond your boundaries, outside your restaurant walls, outside the movie theater?
As I understand it, the technology is such that that could happen, and that's a danger too. If you're standing just outside the movie theater because you want to make the phone call there and it's an emergency type of phone call and you can't, you might not know why, and without trying to be over melodramatic, that could endanger someone's life.
Is part of the problem with cell phones is that really, even though they have become so commonplace, everybody has a cell phone, or there's something like 9 million Canadians have a cell phone right now, and they've become so commonplace, but the technology is still relatively new. So we haven't developed good cell phone etiquette.
We haven't done that. It's been around for about 18 years. They keep getting smaller. They keep, mine is a tiny little device that is a combined pager, an alphanumeric text pager, and a cell phone. And my etiquette is such that I really don't want to use it to just talk. I want to use it as a medium to be intercepted when somebody really needs me, or to make a call when I really need to make one. Other people, and our offices at Universal Teleresponse are located in the heart of Yorkville in Toronto, very busy, trendy section. And I can tell you, being outside in the summer, without overhearing people's conversations on purpose, you catch snippets. And most people on cell phones are talking about things that don't really matter. Now, I'm not casting judgment. People can use them for whatever they want. However, the issue that we're worried about with regard to silencers is whether or not we can reach people who have to be reached when and where.
You know, you bring up an excellent point. And what about if these silencers, if they become legalized, what about them falling into the wrong hands? Because the technology is not really that expensive, $2,500. So what if a would-be rapist buys a silencer and takes it with him so that his intended victim can't call for help.
It's a serious consideration, and I think that that's
because
one
that's
of the...
why I have my cell phone. My cell phone is in my car, and it's there. It's never come up, but it's there for emergencies. Usually the emergency is just that I'm running late, but just in case my car were to break down, I like to have that cell phone with me.
Well, one of the things that we've been discovering, not just with cell phones, but with email and voicemail, is that if somebody really wants to defeat the technology, they can. And unfortunately, I think it's going to be pretty hard to design around that. I'm not a technologist, so I can't comment from a technical perspective. But I think that if you're going to use cell phones, and cell phones are to be used on an ongoing basis for the reasons you've described, being in touch or having an emergency lifeline, if you will, then you have to have an open environment. And I think that the educational aspect plays a large role. Cell phones, for the most part, can be bought with a vibration device on them. So they're not necessarily, if they're set properly, going to disturb anybody else. When I go to see a movie with my wife, I leave the cell phone on, I leave it in vibrate mode, and I take a look at who's calling, or I take a look at the text message while I'm watching the movie, and if it's necessary for me to speak on it, I leave the theater and I don't disturb anybody else. I think that's the best way to go. With regard to the silencers, if you want to make a zone of silence in a public place like a theater or a restaurant, by installing one of these devices, the technology has to be perfect, and that's something for the people at Industry Canada to look at, not me. And not only does the technology have to be perfect, you combine that with the educational aspects and you get a better environment. But like I say, perfect before implementation. And I would say one other thing. If that technology is going to operate, having a sign that tells people like me who need to be in touch that this is in operation so I can make an informed choice is essential.
Yeah, because if you're a doctor on call and you're out for an evening, if you're out to dinner, and you need to get those messages, it could be really dangerous if you walk into a cell phone free zone and you don't know that it's there. That's
correct, and that's why if a restaurant were going to implement that kind of technology, I would certainly want for that doctor, or for myself for that matter, to be informed at the door that a jamming device is in operation and I can make the choice not to be there.
Don't you think, though, all of this could be handled better if there was just a crackdown by individual proprietors on cell phone abusers, those who, you know, the people in the movie theater that leave their cell phone on even after they've been told to turn their cell phones off? Why not just, if that happens, if your cell phone rings, then you're kicked out. You forfeit your $12.50 or however much a movie is.
Well, as the guy who's
You'd only do it once.
You're right. As the guy who's been sitting next to that person whose cell phone rings, and I was at a wedding recently, by the way, where one went off, I think it's appropriate to say, please, out.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a politician, I won't say which politician it was, who was sitting on the set in the middle of a television interview.
Right.
And he had accidentally left his cell phone on and it rang. He's very embarrassed and very apologetic. But, you know, part of the problem is, like you say, they're so small, they're so tiny, and you keep them with you all the time and you forget about them.
Well, I must tell you that knowing I was going to be on your show, and very particularly talking on this subject,
right.
I purposefully turned it off because I rarely do. I remember most of the time to put it on vibrate when I'm going into an area where I might disturb other people. But mostly I don't turn it off at all. I did today so it wouldn't ring on set. But I think that people are not as top of mind as that, and I think that that's where the educational part of it comes in. But speaking as a member of the Canadian Call Management Group and looking at the idea of having to reach people, I'll give you an example. If you're the guy whose furnace has stopped at 3 o'clock in the morning on one of those very cold Canadian nights, it's -20, and the kids are asleep upstairs, and you need the fellow who's going to fix the furnace, and he happens to be using a cell phone or a text messaging device that's incorporated in a cell phone, and you're talking to a live person who works for an organization like mine, you want that person to be reached. You don't want him to be in a zone of silence and not know it.
And isn't it too late to say, you know, as some people have suggested, well, what did we do before we had cell phones?
Well, look, there's a
because we have the technology now. We've come to rely on it.
We have a lot of technology now. Somebody once said to me, just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should do something.
That's true.
However, cell phones serve a useful purpose. There are days in my life where I think we should all line up on the shore of Lake Ontario and on the count of 3 throw them in. And what would happen? Well, we all wouldn't have cell phones is what would happen. However, that's unrealistic. And it's as unrealistic as the fact that I didn't used to get email because there was no such thing, and I today get 100 messages a day.
Wow.
I think it makes life easier when it's used properly. I think the technology is fabulous. I think it's amazing that I can vacation in Florida, and if there's an issue at the office, it'll ring. And I don't think we're going to go backwards. So let's go forwards, and let's do it with an educated approach.
Would you be in favor of, if the federal government decides, if Industry Canada decides to go ahead and license the use of these cell phone silencers, if it was done on a very judicious basis, and meaning maybe just license them for use in hospitals and airports, where the use of cell phones can actually be dangerous and endanger lives?
That's something for them to determine, but I'll say a word about the hospitals. Having been in hospitals, as everybody is, unfortunately, now and then, either to visit or as a patient, we all see the signs that the technology in the hospitals precludes use of the cell phones. What most people don't know is that little cell phone that you carry in your purse or on your belt is, we think of it as a phone. It's a two-way radio, and by the way, a two-way radio that transmits even when you're not on the phone about every 10 seconds.
Right.
What it's doing is it's shaking hands with the cell nearest it. It's saying, I'm still here, and it's being asked, are you still there? And it's saying, I'm still here. So if you're in the hospital, that sign that says turn off the phone means turn off the phone. Turn the switch off, because you can interfere. So I don't think that we're dealing with the same thing in hospitals, because if you put the silencer in the hospital, it too generates radio waves and could cause the same problems with the equipment. Same thing is true in airplanes with navigational equipment and so forth. So I think that the deployment of those devices is going to be something that Industry Canada is going to have to consider very carefully in terms of where and when it's deployed, and certainly if it's deployed.
Okay, well, our telephones are ringing. Let's go to Michael on line 8. Go ahead, Michael, you're on the air.
I think this should not be such
Okay, I think we're having technical problems with Michael. What we'll do, we'll go to commercial break. We'll come back and we'll go back to our phones. And I want to hear from our callers today. The number to call is 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. We're back with more right after these messages. Welcome back to Rhonda London Live. Today we're talking about an idea that is seriously being looked at by Industry Canada. The idea is to legalize the use of cell phone silencers, more commonly known as jammers. The idea is to stop that annoying ring that you hear when you're in movie theaters and restaurants. We're joined in studio by a gentleman who would, well, as you've said, you're on both sides of the issue on this.
Yes. On the one hand, I'm a human being who doesn't want to be disturbed in movie theaters and restaurants, and I'm, on the other side of the coin, a person who provides 7x24 services and speaks for an organization that does the same and has to reach people with cell phones when and wherever they are.
So Peter, would it not just be a lot easier though if we developed a very strict code of cell phone etiquette, as opposed to taking this quite dramatic step and allowing the licensing or the legalization of cell phone silencers, which have been outright banned in the United States?
I think it would be the best way. I think if we could accelerate the educational process and get people to understand where and when they should be used and when they shouldn't be, or when they should be placed on vibrate so that they are not intrusive, that would be the best opportunity of all.
But what's the difference, though, between being annoyed at a really nice restaurant by someone who's talking really loud and being boisterous, or someone whose cell phone is ringing?
What's the difference between being asked to leave because you're boisterous or being asked to leave because the cell phone rings and you want to talk about your golf game, I guess is the response to that. I don't know that there is any difference. Being disturbed is being disturbed. However, being disturbed is a far cry from being essentially in touch with a vital business.
And why does our voice always go up a few decibels when we're talking on a cell phone?
I suppose for the same reason that some people seem to think that
and we
talking
forget
long,
how to drive, too.
We do that, and we talk loud when we're on the phone to London, England, because we think it's further away and they'll hear us better. It's not true.
They can hear you better if you speak up. Well, joining us on the phone from Ottawa, another Peter Barnes. He's the president and the CEO of the Canadian Wireless Telecommunication Association. Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Rhonda.
Where does the association stand on the idea that is being seriously talked about, at least there's a 90-day consultation period, this idea of allowing cell phone silencers?
Well, I'm very much in line with the opinion of your previous guest, because of course I'm also a human being who doesn't like to be disturbed, and also concerned about the public safety issue. The association's position is that the primary concern we have, and it is one of objecting to the use of the licensing of jammers, the primary concern we have is the public safety concern, in that people who are on call for emergency applications, whether they're professional emergencies or personal emergencies, could be cut off from that contact. The convenience aspect, of course, then comes to the fore very quickly. But just think of a doctor who's on call, a family that have left, a couple that have left their phone number with the babysitter while they're out for an evening, and couldn't be reached in an emergency because a business owner has decided to jam conversations. The consequences of that, to me, are quite negative, obviously, but also far out of proportion to the admitted inconvenience of people letting their cell phones ring. And we've been carrying out for some time now, and we're stepping up. We actually began to step this up about a month ago, our whole education campaign on what we call being cell savvy or cell phone etiquette. We've published a brochure, there's documentation on our website, and we're working with a number of associations to develop posters that they can use, for example, in libraries, to remind people, because it is a new technology. People do have to get used to it, including the comment made earlier that people tend to speak a bit louder. They're, it's like the first days of long distance. People felt they had to shout in the phone because somebody was far away. So I think it is an adjustment. People do have to learn to use the technology. We want to do our share, and we certainly are quite willing to do more. But I think that using a sledgehammer to swat a fly with allowing jammers with all of the potential negative and very very high risk negative effects, I think is the wrong way to go.
And Peter, do you think that this would be better handled just by really enforcing good cell phone etiquette or cell phone savvy, as you've suggested? Like, for instance, let's say the proprietor of a restaurant putting up a sign, no cell phones, and anyone who violates that, if your cell phone rings instead of being set on vibrate, then you're asked to leave. You'd only do that once, and you'd make sure that it never happened again.
Yeah, I think what you're quite right. In much the same way that in a public library, if you began to shout, I don't know what their code is, but I'm not sure if they'd throw you out or they'd ask you to leave or tell you to be quiet for the next time. But I think it's much the same. I mean, there are certain behaviors that we have learned over time that we're used to not talking loudly in libraries or in many other locations, and it's the same idea. I think that people have got, both the users and the people around them, be it the owner of a restaurant, in this case manager of a restaurant, do have to take some steps, and if they feel that, and some restaurants encourage people to use cell phones because it's part of their trade and part of their business, and that's the kind of use that people make of the cell phones. In other cases, inappropriate and should go on vibrate. So I think you're quite right. That's the kind of behavior that individuals can take. The industry has got a responsibility, which we certainly hope we're stepping up to. But I still don't think that a legislation or licensing of these devices is the way to go.
Just how dangerous do you think it could be if the government were to go ahead and allow these cell phone silencers, particularly since they're not really that expensive, like $2,500 you could buy one, not just for restaurants and movie theaters to use them, but what about individuals who are up to no good?
Well, that's the concern. There are a couple of concerns. One is that the ones I've mentioned about emergency applications. The other concern, of course, is that radio waves don't stop at the door. And if you had an application of a jammer, for all kinds of reasons that you and I might agree could be useful, let's say that there was such a case, but it just so happens that the radio waves won't stop at the wall or the door and would affect the people next door or on the street or in the car driving by, then you've got a whole issue, because these are radio waves and they do tend to travel. So there's a whole issue, and I think that the use of these by people who might be mischievous or just plain ornery, if I can use the term, just has got so many downsides that it just doesn't bear. We think, frankly, and we've suggested this to the Canadian government over time that the approach taken in the U.S. and many other countries was the best one to start off with, because there's a thin edge of the wedge here that we've got to be concerned about. And as you point out, they are relatively inexpensive, but the damage can be considerable.
Peter Barnes, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Peter Shurman, how great do you think is the safety risk if these silencers were to become widely available? And you know how it is with new technology too, once it floods the market. Right now I think the top end is about $2,500. You can get a silencer for a little bit less. But once they flood the market, you know you'll be able to buy them in Radio Shack 2 years from now for $199.
Well, I think that's a grave danger. I don't think these are the kinds of devices that you'd ever want to see sold in Radio Shack, because I don't think they should ever be generally available. If somebody, for example, powered one up and put it in the trunk of his car and drove into a public place, think of what could happen. So I totally agree with Peter Barnes on that issue. I think that the silencers, if they're going to be deployed, have to be deployed on very strict legal terms, and hopefully we can deal with the educational aspect before that even occurs.
Okay, well, our telephones are ringing today. Just a caution, because we are on tape delay, so you must turn your television all the way down or you won't be able to make any sense of our conversation at all. So let's go to Michael on line 8. Go ahead, Michael, you're on the air.
Hello, yeah.
Hi, Michael.
I totally disagree with everything. I feel that restaurants, I don't feel that no one can be bothered on the restaurant by a cell phone ringing. Like, you can just start over the conversation. It's easy. There's nothing to it. The movies I understand, but it's still not a problem. Like, hey, what's that? And if I ever had my cell phone ringing and they tried to kick me out and not give me my money back, that's not going to happen to me.
Okay, you know what though, Michael, you brought up an excellent point. You're just the type of cell phone user that we all loathe and fear. We hate to sit beside you in a movie theater because we've come to believe that our ringing telephone, our cell phone, is not a privilege, but it's a right.
Well, Michael has the right to his opinion.
We have a right to share our conversation with everybody in a crowded movie theater.
And we respectfully disagree. I respectfully disagree. I think that freedoms are an interesting issue in our society. I should be free to do anything I want as long as it doesn't interfere with you. And Michael clearly disagrees with that point of view, and that's his right too.
But you know, he does bring up one good point though. Perhaps we all collectively as a society need to lighten up a little bit. What difference if the person who's sitting beside us in a restaurant, if their telephone rings?
Well, on the surface,
give them a little bit of mercy and grace. And
cutting people some slack, I think that's a reasonable approach. However, we're talking about something, and you used the word, that's become ubiquitous. Everybody has a cell phone. So we've all been in a restaurant and somebody's cell phone rings and 25 people go like that, looking for it in the purse, on the belt, wherever it happens to be. And I think that's the thing that we're looking to avoid as people. But that doesn't go to the issue of the emergency aspect of it, and that's the one that I have to be concerned with.
You know, I must be probably a real anomaly. Well, in many ways, but as a cell phone user, I'm a real anomaly because I don't bring my cell phone with me or I don't turn it on. And the reason is, I don't want people calling me. I don't want to take a call in the middle of the IGA. I'm sorry.
Have you met my wife?
Is she the same?
She's the same way. And I'm not. I have to have mine on 24 hours a day.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I like those moments when I'm totally out of contact with the whole world.
I think we all do, and I call those vacations.
Yeah, I have a lot of vacations. Let's go to Ian on line 4. Go ahead, Ian, you're on the air.
Okay. At the risk of this being a rather one-sided debate, I'd like to agree with most of the opinions expressed, especially Peter Barnes. But I'd like to offer a slightly different technological perspective.
Sure.
In that if this were to be allowed, there would be a kind of a technological one-upmanship in that cell phone producers or third-party, technology companies would provide some sort of a mechanism whereby if you're a doctor on call or if you think you're just important or your name happens to be Michael, you can get around the jamming. So instead of having to deal with, the person behind me telling me the plot in the theater and the person 3 rows back coughing and the person beside me having their cell phone ring, I now have someone on the other side erecting a 3-foot antenna dish because
I want to thank you so much for your phone call because you bring up such an excellent point. And you can see if these become widely available, these cell phone silencers, I think Ian is right on. It won't be that long before you can buy jam-proof cell phones.
You know something? It's a reasonable point of view. And knowing a little bit about how technology is designed, I can tell you that the people who are smart enough to have designed cell phones in the first place and now design the jammers can also get around it by what's known as selective calling, where in theory you could have a zone of silence, but that person who absolutely has to be reached in an emergency can be exempted.
So then we can find out in the restaurant who the really, really important people are.
Man, if my cell phone rings in that restaurant, I must be somebody.
Yeah, not like the rest of the peasants who don't have jam-proof phones.
There you go.
Peter Shurman, our time is gone, but I want to thank you so much for joining us today on the show. It's been really nice talking to you.
My pleasure, Rhonda.
Don't go away. We're going to take a commercial break. We want to take as many calls as possible today. The number to call is 905-332-3131 or 416-203-0302. Welcome back to Rhonda London Live. Industry Canada is toying with the idea of allowing, or at least is in the consultation process right now, a 90-day consultation process, to see if it should allow the use of cell phone silencers, or better known as jammers. The idea is if you go into a restaurant or a movie theater, whether you like it or not, your cell phone would be rendered inert. Joining our conversation, lawyer Paul McKeever. He's an executive member of the Freedom Party of Ontario. And Paul, I think we have finally brought to you, a freedom conundrum. Because on one hand, of course, your party advocates freedom. So on one hand, as a sole proprietor, I should be able to establish whatever I want, a jamming device. But then on the other hand, you have people that love their cell phones, and perhaps they should have the right or the freedom to use their cell phone wherever they want.
I think this relates a lot to the cigarette issue. You have right now in various municipalities the right to smoke in certain restaurants, and in other places you can't smoke. And in some places the proprietor has no power to allow you to smoke. Now, I guess my view on this and that of the Freedom Party would be that if you're the proprietor, you are the person who decides what goes on in your building. This is your place. If you don't want people to wear shoes on the rug, you can say don't wear shoes on the rug. If you want to allow them to smoke, you should be able to allow them. The only person who owns that building is you, not the people who visit it. And as long as you're making it clear to everybody who comes to the door what the terms, what the conditions for admission will be, then they are informed. They'll know whether or not their phone is going to work, whether or not they should be smoking a cigarette, whether or not they should be wearing their shoes on the floor. And so, yes, we have the freedom to use our cell phones in public or on our own property. But just as we wouldn't allow a person to have the choice about whether or not to bring in a dirty shovel, we shouldn't be allowing, making the decision based on the consumer to bring in a phone and use it in the theater. If the theater owner doesn't want it used, that should be his right. Of course, the concern is...
But does there have to be proper signage? Because let's say, take the example, let's say of an obstetrician who's on call.
Right.
You know, it doesn't have to be in the hospital, but is waiting, one of his patients is about to give birth, any day. The physician's on call.
Right.
Has a perfect right to go out to dinner with his or her family. And
certainly has the freedom to do so.
So what if they miss, that doctor, that obstetrician misses the emergency phone call and misses the birth of one of his patients?
Well, I think you're right to point out the signage issue. No one can consent to something if they don't know what it is they're consenting to. So if a person wants to prohibit or to use a jammer to prohibit the use of phones or to prohibit their functionality, I think there's a duty incumbent upon that owner, that proprietor, to post in a visible way the fact that phones will not work on his premises. And then it's up to the prospective patron, be it the doctor or the lawyer or whoever important he or she might be, to say, well, look, these are the conditions. If I want to eat here, my phone won't work. At that point, it's the doctor's responsibility about whether or not he wants to be in communication with his possible patients or not. And we can't be laying that responsibility on the door of the noodle salesman, the soup Nazi, or whatever he might be.
The soup Nazi. You watch Seinfeld too. Let's go to Valerie on line 3. Go ahead, Valerie. You're on the air.
Hi, Rhonda.
Hi, Valerie. What do you think about this?
Well, I'm probably about 1 of 10 people in the world that doesn't own a cell phone. But I do work for a helpline in which we use a cell phone. We're on 24 hours a day. And what we are, we answer phone calls for women who have been raped or who are in domestic abuse situations who need to escape that minute to from this abusive situation, and their life may be in danger. And it scares me to think that I may be on the cell phone that night and walking past a restaurant that happens to have this blockage, and a lady can't get through and is therefore further abused or assaulted because she can't reach me during this block.
Yeah, Valerie, you bring up an excellent point. And plus, Paul, a scenario that I brought up earlier in the show, this technology is not really prohibitively expensive. And you know, once if Industry Canada allows it to come on the market, you know the price is only going to go down. So what's to prevent, let's say if I want to stick one in my car, a cell phone jammer, and just wreak havoc along the 401, what's to prevent me from doing that?
That's right. Well, you're dealing with two issues. I think the caller was talking about the accidental bleeding of that jamming signal into the into the public sphere, and there I think that's a technological issue and certainly one that the law should address. If someone's using equipment that outside of the limits of his own property, is causing others to have a difficulty operating their phone, I think that person is doing something that ought not to be permitted. Now, how that's handled, whether it's by improving the technology, not allowing technology to be used unless it cannot bleed that jamming signal into the public, or whether it's by imposing a fine on people who ride down the road with a jammer in their trunk,
just for kicks.
For the heck of it, you know, and probably a very serious one, I would think. In fact, you know, that would be, to my mind, something equivalent to interfering with justice in many cases. You just never know how it might be used. So
is that a problem? Because this is pretty sensitive technology. So even if you could see, let's say a restaurant owner, you could see their right to ban the use of cell phones in their restaurant.
Absolutely.
You can see how this technology is so sensitive that perhaps it shouldn't become widely available.
Yeah, if the technology is so crude that it can't be contained within the
but if you allow a restaurant owner to buy it, though, then that's opening the door to like some yahoo who's going to stick one in his trunk.
That might be. We can't prevent people from using a fork to poke people in the crowd, and so that doesn't mean we should be banning forks. I think the appropriate response to that is perhaps to use technology to our advantage. If someone's driving around with a
but if I poke you with a fork, you know I'm doing it.
That's true. That's true.
That's the difference.
Well, what I was going to say is, if you have a jammer, perhaps we shouldn't allow it until the technology's there to allow police to track a moving jammer, for example.
Okay. We've got time for one more phone call before we let you go for the day, Paul. Let's go to Jennifer on line 7. Go ahead, Jennifer. You're on the air.
Hi.
Hi, Jennifer. Go ahead.
Yeah, I loved the episode today, and I'd have to say I agree with almost everything almost everybody has said so far. I'm looking at it through the angle of it would be very convenient in places like movie theaters because of the fact that we have people who are just being inconsiderate.
People like Michael.
And yeah, and if we didn't have these people being inconsiderate and using their phones in places like movie theaters, we wouldn't even be discussing this topic.
Yeah, Jennifer, but you know, you bring up such an excellent point, and that's what I was saying again earlier in the show. I think that this, instead of going for the technological solution to this problem, I think the proprietors of movie theaters and restaurants and even maybe some church ministers should get really strict and tough on people who don't turn their cell phones off when they go to church, when they go to the movie theater, when they go to the restaurant. Have signage posted, and you don't get any warnings.
I guess so, and that's not to say they shouldn't. That's certainly a responsible thing to do. If you don't want someone smoking in your restaurant, you can tell them to butt out.
You'd have a hard time kicking people out of a church service.
Yeah, and this is the difficulty. I read someone complaining about, you know, what if someone has a cell phone ring during a funeral service or during a mass?
That happened. In researching this topic today, there was a woman who had written a letter to the editor that actually happened to her.
Right.
During her mother's funeral service.
That's right. So there are, I guess the real purpose of the jamming is to allow this to be done in a uniform way and allow it to be done in a way that doesn't necessarily result in confrontation. And by the way, I mean, I can't see why they couldn't have, for example, at a movie theater, a system where if a phone is called, it somehow gets forwarded to a centralized distribution thing, and if it's an emergency call, that call would be allowed to be patched through by the theater owner to the cell. I'm not sure what the technology permits.
Actually, it's sophisticated enough that the high-end cell phone silencer, you can actually make it automatically, no matter what your phone is set on. If your phone is set on ring, this technology will change that to vibrate. So that could answer the question.
Right. It certainly could, and again, I think that'd be perfectly acceptable.
Okay, Paul McKeever, our time is gone, but thank you so much for joining us today on the show. It's always so nice talking to you.
You too.
Don't go away. We're going to continue this conversation. Phone line's very busy, but a couple of phone lines open right now. The number to call is 905-332-3131. We're back right after this. Welcome back to Rhonda London Live. Today we're talking about the possibility that cell phone silencers may become legalized in Canada. Joining our conversation, Carl Olson from Industry Canada. He's a director for spectrum management in Ontario and is responsible for licensing radio systems in the province and ensuring interference-free operation for all users of the radio spectrum. Carl, thank you so much for joining us. Now we have a lot of phone calls today. We're not going to be able to get to all of our callers. However, if people who are watching this program really want to have a say on this issue, really want to make a difference, we're going to be putting up in a little bit, so they might as well get a piece of paper now, a piece of paper and a pen, because we're going to be putting up an email address and we're going to be putting up an address where they can write Industry Canada and their voice will be heard and weighed.
And that's exactly what we're looking for. When we were faced with this issue as to whether we should, well, whether we should even permit the use in Canada, because some other countries, in fact, had prohibited the use.
Well, the United
outright.
States has prohibited the
and
use.
And they weren't the only country that's done that. Others have done it as well. We had licensed to police and public safety agencies, but the issue was, should we allow others, like theater owners, restaurants? So the best way to do it was to find out what people think. So we've put the information out. We've been quite pleased with the way that the media, for example, has been following this issue and to give us some promotion. In fact, we are getting lots of emails and lots of letters, and this is all going to be taken into account.
What sort of feedback are you getting so far?
What you had heard earlier today was that and more.
Well, how are you going to weigh all this, though? Because there seems to be as many for as against.
Well, yes, and in fact, you'll find people, as your first guest today, who in fact was split. You know, and in fact, some of the letters we get are on that, but we also get letters from doctors, for example, saying, I really cannot have this happen to me when I'm in a restaurant. It should not be a surprise that, you know, in terms of whether a doctor could be reached or not. So that is it is a very strong concern. We have others who are saying is that if I'm going to spend a lot of money on a meal, I want to have that meal quiet. I don't want to listen to someone's cell phone conversations.
Yeah, but maybe we all need to lighten up.
Yeah, well, there's a part in that. There's a fair amount that can be done with just better relations amongst people. Yeah.
Well, what about the suggestion that I put forward today that maybe it should be up to restaurant proprietors and the owners of movie theaters to be a lot more diligent about, first off, warning people to turn off their phones and maybe asking offenders to leave.
Well,
I don't think it should be up to individual movie patrons to deal with people like Michael. You know, the person who's going to talk on a cell phone no matter what.
Well, I was at a performing arts theater in Toronto recently with a good-sized crowd, well over 1,000 people, and they did an announcement at the start saying, "Please turn all cell phones off. Don't use flash cameras." And people did use flash cameras, but they did not use cell phones. I didn't hear a single cell phone ring. There may have been someone's vibrator phone went off, but certainly I didn't hear any cell phones, and I was quite pleased because it was an expensive show.
Okay, yeah, you wouldn't want to hear someone's cell phone conversation in the middle of The Lion King.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was well appreciated, and I was surprised that many people would follow the instructions. I'm sure that more than half of those people had a cell phone with them.
Okay, well, our phones are ringing. Want to take as many calls as possible today. Let's go to Crystal on line 4. Go ahead, Crystal. You're on the air.
Hi.
Hi, Crystal.
I agree with the cell phone jammers just because I know myself it is annoying, but I also disagree on a whole nother hand just because sometimes when you go to a restaurant or a movie theater, children are with their parents, and sometimes they cry and they have a hissy fit, and they cause a disturbance. So really, what's the difference between our cell phones ringing and children crying and car accidents happening on the middle of the street?
Yeah, Crystal, you bring up an excellent point. And maybe collectively as a society, we should be willing to put up with a lot more of these little minor irritations, this little bit of annoyance, if a person's life could be saved by a cell phone. And I know I'm thinking of the doctor or the obstetrician or the cardiac surgeon who is on call being able to get that message that they're needed at the hospital no matter what.
That's the balance, and many people could make that balance. Certainly if they heard the call next to them was in fact a doctor and they could figure it was a doctor from the nature of the conversation, everyone would forgive it. In many cases it's not, so they're not quite as tolerant. But
isn't it, like, really, in truth, though, if we're going to be totally honest today, 99.9% of all cell phone conversations, well, maybe I guess when you get into the business realm, actual business is being conducted, but usually it's like, hey, where are you right now? What are you doing?
Yes,
what are you doing? You know, and back and forth,
It's like regular telephone conversations, exactly. But at the same time, there are important telephone conversations. 911 operators, for example, receive more and more of their calls are from cell phones.
See, now, if the world were to use the cell phone the way that I do, the world would be a much nicer place. I just use it for those emergency phone calls to call out and say, I'm running behind schedule, but I'm on my way now. And that's it. Why can't everybody be like me, Carl?
I wish that was the case, but certainly we're getting a wide range of responses. By the way, the responses that we are receiving at our website and by mail,
hey, let's put those addresses up.
Okay, we're actually putting those responses on our website for others to view them as they're coming in.
So how seriously are you going to take this consultation? Is it just like, is it the bulk of response that you get, or is it the overriding concern?
It will be
if somebody raises excellent points, let's say like the excellent points I've raised today, will that have more weight than just maybe sheer number of responses?
Well, no, it won't be a count of so many for and so many against. It'll certainly be an issue of what are the concerns being raised. Have we forgotten anything in terms of that question? Because there's some interesting things that are already starting to come out that when we were deciding whether we're going to have a ban or not, because that's the first question, is that we hadn't, well, by no means did we think that we had thought about all the possibilities why people would want to have these devices. So let's find out. Is there something we've missed out there? So we may find something there, or we may find, for example, there's a pretty strong consensus out there in one side or the other. If that's the case, then I think we have a good consultation.
For all the annoyance of cell phones, my concern is if this technology were to become widely available, you'd get, you know, the scenario that I brought up, some Yahoo driving down the 401 with one in his trunk.
Yes, exactly, and that would be something for us to deal with in our organization. That's part of the services that we provide. That's that interference-free portion that you had explained, and that's very expensive to do, and it's very tough to do, particularly when something is moving. But at the same time, we've dealt with things like that in the past, and we'll deal with them as they come up in the future. But hopefully, we'll not have to deal with them.
Carl Olson, our time is gone, but I want to thank you so much for joining us today on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope you get lots of feedback from this show.
So do I.
Thanks again. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Rhonda London Live right after these messages. Stay tuned. Finally today, if you can, imagine milk with bubbles. That's right, bubbles, the carbonated kind. A new milk drink is about to hit the market, and here's CNN's Jeannie Mose with the story.
You know that white stuff that comes out of a cow? Well, holy cow. Imagine carbonated milk. It's pasteurized, it's homogenized, it's colorized.
It's yummy.
It's emu. Emu! And it lives up to its name.
We start out with milk and we end up with milk.
Marianne Clark and her husband dreamed up emu as a healthier alternative to soft drinks. They figure kids who don't like to drink milk will be attracted to the bubbly taste.
Tastes like melted creamsicle that's carbon dehydrated.
Otherwise known as carbonated, food scientists here at Cornell University helped develop emu.
I think it's got a chance. I think it's, when I first heard about the product, I was pretty skeptical, but when we started producing it, I started tasting it. It's a really good product.
Injecting carbon dioxide extends emu's refrigerated shelf life to 6 weeks. Orange creamsicle will be the first flavor to hit northeastern grocery stores this summer. Future flavors range from raspberry chocolate to bubble gum.
What we see ourselves as the Ben & Jerry's of fluid milk.
Emu is skim milk, no fat, sweetened with fructose and color.
This is good. It's awful good, actually.
No mad cow disease in there, right? Tastes a little bit medicine-y, though.
And orange milk can be scary. As for the name...
Emu! That's so cute.
Maybe this emu doesn't think so. The flightless bird known as the emu, EMU, seen here doing a mating dance, looks like he's had too much carbonation. And where'd they get the E in emu? Mary Ann's husband coined the name.
He's on the web page and on the internet all the time, and he just said, emu. I go, hey, I like it.
While offering samples of emu, we ran into a guy already carrying his own beverage. But this is like vodka, right?
Exactly. Do you smell it?
Yeah, but I don't know if emu goes with vodka.
Emu?
Yeah.
Emu.
Folks aren't yet saying got emu, and no one's wearing an emu mustache. Emu can't do everything milk can.
That wouldn't taste too great on cereal.
Kiddies, we do not recommend you try this at home. Your mom would have a cow. Gene Emos, CNN, New York.
Don't go away. I'll be right back with a preview of what's coming up Monday on Rhonda London Live after this. That's our show for today. Thanks for watching. Monday on Rhonda London Live, Ontario's squeegee kids have been forced out of business by the Safe Streets Act. Critics charge that the legislation is draconian and unfairly picks on the poor and the vulnerable. The Harris government, however, contends the streets are made safer because of the bill. We'll take a look at both sides of the issue. That's coming up Monday on the show. I hope you'll join me. In the meantime, have a great day and a wonderful weekend.